a pretty landmark Supreme Court decision just handed down, where they have ruled against affirmative action in college admissions. This was a case that was brought about Harvard, I believe. And the Supreme Court, of course, very influenced by the appointments of Donald Trump, were able to do something that conservatives have been trying to do for a long time in this country. It's not too often that there are things that you could call a legit conservative win in America. I also think this is a win for just people who oppose racism, which is ironic in a sense because the loudest anti-racist voices in the country are the ones who are very upset by this. But essentially, the Supreme Court determined that Harvard and other colleges had been discriminating on the base of race against Asians and whites, and that this was unconstitutional and it violated the Equal Protection Clause. This is, to me, seems to be pretty obviously the correct view on this. I don't know. Any initial thoughts, Rob?
Well, this just came out, so I haven't fully been able to dive in, but I do have a question for you. Mm-hmm. Now, I understand government not being able to legislate that you have to take people from particular minority groups because they're from a minority group, because then you end up in a discriminatory position where you can have someone who clearly, I mean, just look at it like sports is the clearest example. Imagine if they dictated that you have to have a certain amount of white people on your team. And you've got someone who's clearly a much better basketball player, and now you have to field a worse team because it's been mandated that you need to have a Jew on your team. How many Jews are in the NBA right now? Imagine if they mandated that every team needed to have some whiny Jew and that you needed to give him time on the court, right? We can all see why that makes no sense. The same thing happens at Harvard, I guess, every single year. They're looking at people, and there's one guy who's got slightly better academics and one person who's got slightly worse, but because of the race of the person was slightly worse.
Just to push back on this a little bit already, and I want to get to your point, but if you actually look at it, it's not just slightly worse. It's appalling. They've actually done this where they break it down into categories. What's it called? Decimals, 10 categories. And if you're in the top category for Asians, you have a lower chance of getting admitted than if you're in the third lowest category as an African American. It's not like slightly lower. It's like the standards are insanely higher for Asians and for white people.
So I fully understand that I wouldn't take the stance that government should mandate that you as Harvard should be forced to, take a black person over a white person if the black person had worse credentials. However, if it's now good for your business that you look at your college and you go, I'm actually not that concerned with academics. I want everyone to be over a certain threshold, but I don't want more than 15% Asians and I don't want less than 10% blacks because in order for this to be the Harvard experience, we like to have 60% white people here, 10% black people here, and 15% Asian. That's what the Harvard experience is for our core demographic, which is the 60% whites that attend our college. I'm making up these numbers, but it is still funny that a rich white American gets to attend the Harvard of their dreams that has exactly 50% Asians and 10% blacks so that they can pretend like that they are more cultured and engaging in, I guess, a wider scope of what the world really looks like. And that's hilarious that you're going to be with the wealthiest, privileged, and smartest of the world, but yet the fact that they're 10% black adds to your cultural experience. Yeah. I'm talking too much here, but just to make my point, if that's Harvard's business decision, I don't think the government should force them that they have to accept the minorities, but if they like having their 15% Asians and don't want to go over that quota, I mean, are we going to take the stance that the government should mandate that it should be purely academics?
Yeah, well, listen, I understand the position you're taking, and I think that if you were to take this in a vacuum, in theory, what the pure libertarian position and what my position, and I think yours too probably would be, is private companies or private institutions can admit whoever they want to for whatever criteria they want to, and that's their business. And if they're a racist organization and you object to that, then you have every right to speak out against them, every right to not go there, boycott, etc. But really, there should be no role for the government involved. That is my view on these things. the situation that we're actually living in is much, much murkier than that, and for several reasons. And one of the reasons is because affirmative action in general was sparked by government intervention. There were laws all over the place for decades that insisted on quotas, and it actually were doing what you would object to them doing, forcing, many different institutions in America to accept minorities, even if they weren't as qualified. The other major issue you have here is that the college is a government program across the board. I mean, it's just like all of the loans are given by the government, right? So now you're in a very murky area as to whether you can really consider this a truly private institution. And the other fact is that we do live under a civil rights regime, whether we like it or not. That's just the reality. If you were all of the and Justice Roberts pointed this out in his decision, that he said the justices dissenting here would absolutely find this illegal if it were being done to blacks or Hispanics. That's the truth. This would be considered illegal if they were being discriminated against under the law. Nobody would object to that. They only object to it on the basis of it's okay to discriminate against these races because we want more of these races in. And as long as you have that type of regime and that type of government involvement, I think the only reasonable thing here is just like, either everyone gets protection or no one gets protection. It can't be this kind of like certain racial groups get protection and others don't. And if we're living in the world where these certain racial groups are getting protected, but then when it comes to the other racial groups getting protected, we go, well, no, we've got these libertarian principles, so we won't support that. The de facto answer then is that only certain racial groups get the protections. So it's kind of got to be either all or nothing. It's got to be either you can't discriminate based on race, or you can, and the government's completely decoupled from the situation. Does that make sense?
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, so there used to be a law that you would, by force, have to take a certain percentage of minority groups. Mm-hmm. It would seem to me that in the ESG world that we live in, you kind of have to, like the same way corporations kind of have to promote minority groups now, because otherwise it just doesn't look good. And right. I've certainly worked in offices where it seemed like white males were very unlikely to get promoted, even if their performance record was far superior to ladies on the sales. Like, I mean, especially in sales. In sales, it's very clear. Hey, I'm the top manager on the floor. You can look at the performance record, and I've seen where, well, sorry, you can't get promoted because the last 3 people we promoted were all white men, so you're going to have to wait in line till we find a person who clearly does not have the same track record as you because they either fill my lady box or minority group box. But even if you get rid of the government, I guess, mandating, what is the actual implication from this? Because I can't imagine that Harvard's going to turn around tomorrow and go, we're only admitting based off of now academic standards and have an institution that's 90% Asian.
Well, that's going to be right. That's going to be interesting to see. And I don't know what the answer is. I agree with you that I have a hard time imagining that will be the case. But I think one of the issues that we have here is that this very strange worldview has kind of permeated our culture and our society in a way that it's intertwined with government intervention, but it's not exclusively about government intervention anymore. And it's been very interesting to kind of see. I tweeted something out about this earlier today, but how much we're like living in this upside down world where people are actually, like many people, particularly progressives, are actually calling this racist, this decision. Like they're saying it's racist that you will no longer be discriminating against whites and Asians in favor of blacks and Hispanics. That's considered racist. Just think about how much the meaning of everything has been flipped on its head when that's the worldview. And I'm not even talking about government intervention. I'm just talking about, like, if you look at the policy of discriminating against a group based on their race, and then you don't see that as racist, you see that as anti-racist. And then when that's ended, you see that as racist. It's very hard to even have a conversation about these things. And so many people just kind of have that mentality now, which is very, I think, clearly upside down, that they go, even like in the example you're talking about in a sales force or something like that, if you're clearly a better salesman, but we're going to promote a woman over you because the last 3 promotions have gone to men. So you're discriminating against someone on the basis of sex. And the justification in their mentality is like, well, otherwise it would be sexist. Otherwise, it would be sexist if we didn't discriminate against you on the basis of your sex. That is so bonkers to me. And it's been that basically like instilled in people through the entire affirmative action mindset that somehow it's like the view is somehow like, well, we know that it's been unfair in the past, and therefore we must make it unfair in the present to balance out the unfairness in the past. I've always rejected this because the logic of it to me just seems so goofy. It's like if things were unfair in the past, then end what the unfairness was. You don't have to then make it unfair in the present. It's like if you took it to its logical conclusion, the perspective of people who believe in affirmative action should be what? Well, I guess we got to enslave white people for a few hundred years, then give them another 100 years of Jim Crow. And then at that point, we can go even. Now we all get right. But then you might be like, oh, the whites were enslaved most recently, so they're suffering. Like, what is that? And of course, none of them would take it to its logical conclusion. And I don't know exactly what their reason for rejecting that would be, but probably because it's like, well, we can't do that. That's really fucked up to like enslave white people for hundreds of years and then 100 years of Jim Crow for them. I mean, so we won't take it that far. We'll just do like a miniature version of that. But it's still just fucked up. It's that individual, whoever the individual is, who doesn't get the sales promotion or doesn't get admitted to a college, who was more qualified, they're still suffering some type of injustice because of the injustice that they had nothing to do with of the past.